Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Laguna Beach, and on behalf of our Social Action Committee and advocates for cost-effective justice, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you here today. I would especially like to welcome and introduce our speaker, Assistant Sheriff Steve Kay. Before we start, let me provide you, our audience, with some useful context. The Orange County Sheriff Coroner Department is a very large, multifaceted law enforcement agency that is served by approximately 4,000 sworn and professional staff members and over 800 reserve personnel. Our speaker, Assistant Sheriff Steve Kay, is part of Sheriff Coroner Sandra Hutchinson's executive team. He is the Orange County Assistant Sheriff in charge of Custody Operations and Court Services Command. That means he oversees the 3 jail facilities in Orange County. He is in charge of all inmate services, including inmate reentry programs and all court operations. Personally, he has 28 years of service in the Orange County Sheriff's Department. He grew up in Hawaii and joined the Armed Services at age 17. And following that, went into service with the Orange County Sheriff's Department. He is married with how many kids?
3 children.
3 children. He is a motorcycle enthusiast, and he enjoys riding his motorcycle through our national parks. Orange County has one of the nation's largest jail systems. It processes more than 64,000 bookings every year and houses more than 6,000 inmates on any given day. This is obviously a tremendous challenge, and this morning we'll hear about the efforts to meet those challenges by our Orange County Sheriff's Department. Today, Steve will speak to us about jail conditions, mental health services, undocumented detainees, remediation, recidivism rates, and community reentry. We all want the same things as the Orange County Sheriff's Office. We want public safety and a criminal justice system that has integrity and functions to rehabilitate and help successfully reintegrate prisoners into society once their time has been served. There are some posters around the room that display some major problems with the federal government's sentencing mandates. California and Orange County have been able to offer effective alternatives when sentencing for drug offenses. Steve will be able to touch on those programs and more this morning. After Steve is done with each segment, question and answer period will follow. We have 3x5 cards for you to write down questions, and we will bring a microphone to you to ask your questions. Or you can hand in your 3x5 cards with your questions for response after each of the 3 segments. Please feel free to get up and get coffee or treats at any time. And with all that said, please everyone join me in giving a warm welcome to Assistant Sheriff Steve Kay.
Okay, can you hear me? Well, I had some casual conversations before we started this event, and I've got to tell you, Daga was listening. I don't remember saying all of the things that I said, but boy, she knows everything about me at this point. We need her as an investigator for that. But as she mentioned, I have been with the Orange County Sheriff's Department for 28 years, and for those of you that don't know how a Sheriff's Department works when it comes to the jails, all deputy sheriffs are trained as peace officers in the state of California, and the local police departments also attend our academy. And so all of our deputy sheriffs have the same training that all police officers do. However, there's one big difference. When police officers graduate the academy, they immediately transfer out to the streets and work as patrol officers. In the Orange County Sheriff's Department, when you graduate from the police academy, you then become a jail deputy. And eventually, as time goes on and we have openings in our patrol division, you will filter out to the patrol division. Although every time you promote to a higher rank, you then return to the jails and you work there as a supervisor. So I started my career as a jail deputy Worked there for about 5.5 years as a jail deputy, and then transferred to the patrol division, where I was a patrol officer, bicycle patrol officer, canine handler, and a few other assignments. I then promoted as sergeant and went back to the jails again as a supervisor. A couple of years after that, I worked in the patrol division again. I promoted to lieutenant, went back to the jails as a lieutenant. I've worked in labor relations, I've worked in internal affairs in a few other places, and then eventually, as I promoted up to commander, the sheriff asked me to come back to the jails again. So I have probably served more years in the Orange County jail system than most of our inmates. And so certainly it's a little better to be able to come and go as you wish, but nevertheless, I have spent well over 1/3 of my career serving in the Orange County jail system. And so I understand what it takes to run a jail from the very bottom level all the way to the top level. And that's not to say that I am necessarily the greatest person at doing those things, but I have done them to an extent that I feel comfortable in understanding the nuances and the issues that are out there. So when we talk about county jail, there's often a confusion between county jails and state prisons. When you talk about law violations, you basically have 3 types of violations. You have infractions, which are the things that you see often when you get pulled over and people get a ticket, or it may be a code violation in a city. Then you have misdemeanors. These are low-level crimes that you can, if convicted, serve up to 1 year in the county jail. And then you have felonies, and these are major crimes. And for a felony conviction, you are held in the county jail until your trial is complete. And if you're found guilty, you are then transferred to the state prison to serve your sentence. And so those are the 3 types of crimes that you generally see. So what happened most recently is, as some of you may know, California's prisons were horribly overcrowded. It resulted in some federal lawsuits. There were issues with medical care, overcrowding, unsafe conditions, and so the federal courts ordered the state of California to lower its population. Now, what they didn't want to do as a state was just open the floodgates and let everybody out of prison. So what they decided to do was make it a county problem. What the state said, in essence, was, yes, you used to house misdemeanors, but now we're going to ask you to house some felons as well. And they said the type of felons that we are going to now leave in your care are nonviolent, non-sexual charges, or non-serious felonies. Now, that's for the charge that they were arrested and convicted on. That doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't have that sort of past in their background. And so what that meant here in Orange County over the last 2.5 years is that our population has grown by 1,000 inmates. Now, those 1,000 inmates used to go to state prison when they were convicted of a felony. It's created quite an issue for us in our jail system. When we talk about nonviolent, non-sexual, non-serious felonies, generally what you're talking about are thefts and narcotic violations. And the thefts are usually tied in with the narcotic violations, people trying to support their drug habits, things of that nature. And so what we have found is an overwhelming attempt to smuggle drugs into our jails. We now have a population that has created a market, and so that has been a very big challenge for us. We've been trying to change a lot of the things that we're doing. We have a more sophisticated jail population now, and we have healthcare issues that we did not deal with before. An example of that would be hepatitis C. If we had someone convicted of a felony, we would send them to state prison. There are protocols for treating hepatitis C, and there are a series of medications and things that are administered. And the inmates just were not in our custody long enough to complete that process. So generally, anybody that had that ailment would go to state prison and begin their treatment protocols. Now, because we have felons in our custody and they stay longer, we actually give those protocols now. Treatment for one person is about $85,000. So when you talk about 1,000 people that are now in your custody, many of them intravenous drug users, you are going to find a population that is in need of that type of treatment, and it can be very costly. So the healthcare costs are really growing at an astronomical rate. We are adapting to those things, but it's a challenge. This is not something that was budgeted for and that there was a lot of thought put into. The real nexus to all of this was the state prisons had to lower their population numbers, and the counties were going to have to come up with solutions. And that's not to say that the state hasn't done their part in attempting to fund some of these things, but generally, as everyone knows, the funding is never enough. staff. And so we're trying to come up with alternatives and ways to deal with our inmate population, how to manage and keep those folks in jail that need to be in jail, and at the same time come up with some alternatives to jail, because it's not a one-size-fits-all type of a system. And so before I get into a couple of the programs that we're looking to work towards, are there any questions from the audience on who we have in our jails, or any programs or thoughts about that?
Sorry.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
I think my first question is about what you started with, which was becoming a jail deputy.
Yes.
I'm curious what your thoughts are about how this mandate, that's how I understand it, is that it's a mandate, right?
It
It's
is.
not a choice. Impacts the deputy's investment in understanding and serving the clients while they're in custody.
I remember 28 years ago when I went to the jails to work. Prior to that, in the academy, the entire academy was about law enforcement, investigating crimes, report writing, and the very technical aspects of what it takes to be a law enforcement officer in the state of California. Now, that's great for all the police officers in the class and for those going directly to patrol, but we really didn't have a whole lot in the way of getting our folks ready to actually work in the jails. We had what we call the jail academy, but it was very brief. And what we realized was it is important for our deputy sheriffs to understand what it takes to be a law enforcement officer, but it's just as important for them to understand the laws, the rules, the regulations, and my expectations of them as they work in the jails. And so we now have a 2-week jail academy that is specific to all of the laws and the nuances of working in a jail, and then we put that deputy sheriff with a field training officer for an additional 6 weeks of training. When I first got to the jails, my very first day, I was introduced to my training officer. He said, "Hey, we're really busy. Go over there and do that, and I'll check in with you later." And so we've really evolved as a jail and as a department, and we've professionalized the requirements. The other thing that we've done is we've realized we don't need deputy sheriffs in every position in the jail. And so we have now created what we call correctional services assistants, who are non-sworn professional staff whose career is actually to work in the jails, not transition out like the deputies do. There are some folks that think we should completely switch over to that model. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, for the deputies union, our deputy sheriffs, again, are fully trained peace officers. So when we have major events, last night's earthquake, the Yorba Linda fires, the unrest in Anaheim, we have what we call a mobile field force. We will round up some of our jail deputies, put them into platoons, and then deploy them into Orange County's communities. And so they are the backup support and the backbone for public safety. So we will always maintain a level of deputy sheriffs in the jail, but we recognize we didn't have to keep the levels that we did before. And so you're seeing more professional staff in the jails. And I mentioned this to people in our department, and they're often shocked by it. We used to be about 75–80% sworn staff. We are now the minority on the department. So we are the Orange County Sheriff's Department, but there's a little asterisk there. Hope I answered your question.
I was just wondering if when the state dictated that the county had to accept these prisoners from state prisons, did the counties have any say-so in this? Was there any resistance from the counties? And if so, how did it all get resolved? In other words, how did you end up having to take these prisoners and I guess, expend county tax money?
Well, I'll tell you, there was huge resistance to the idea of doing this, as you can imagine. One of the fortunate things for Orange County was our jail population numbers had reached all-time lows. And so we actually had bed space in our jails, but there are several counties in California that had no bed space and were already under federal mandates to lower their population numbers and had no space to absorb some of these inmates. And so you can imagine the dismay on their part for this. And so collectively, the counties did everything they could to fight it. But ultimately, we have to remember it was the federal courts that were imposing this sanction on the states. So the state wasn't going to release these people on an island. They were going to send them back to our communities one way or another. So at a certain point, the counties realized, for lack of a better term, they want to negotiate terms of surrender. And in essence, that is what happened. The county said, let's work on the best of some limited options and see what we can do to minimize the public safety impact of this. And so that is how the solution eventually came. Now again, the dollars are never enough that come with this mandate from the state, and so there's a frustration level at times from the counties that this is an unfunded mandate that the state has put upon us. And I don't know that they could double the money that they're giving us and we would be satisfied. There are so many challenges with this population that we'll probably never get all of the dollars that we need, but I will say that Governor Brown had promised certain things to the counties as far as funding for this population, and we were very skeptical that we would get anywhere near what we've already received. And so I will give him credit for pushing those things through. Certainly not enough, but he has kept his word on the things that he said he would do.
Thank you.
Is there some?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I wanted to know, can you
tell us what is being done to prevent drug smuggling?
Well, there are a few different things that we're doing. We're tightening up the ability of people who come into our jail system, and when I say that I mean visitors and other people, because these things are coming in a lot of different ways. We recently gathered a group of experts to kind of tighten up some of our security measures in the facilities and add some additional staffing to places like the mailroom. A lot of our narcotics are mailed in, and you would think, a lot of people think that, you could pick out a thing of drugs very easily in the mail. It's not as easy as you think. Sometimes somebody will put just a drop of something on a stamp, and the inmate on the inside knows that this stamp is tainted. Now, imagine if you're working in the mailroom and you're handling this kind of stuff, you have the potential to touch this sort of thing. And so we have to actually protect our folks in the mailroom with gloves and breathing masks and those sorts of things. We have now narcotics detection dogs. One of the other ways, and one of the big ways where the big narcotics are coming in, and I don't want to get too graphic, but body cavities of people who violate probation or parole that are brought back into our jail. And so I am actually looking to get a body scanning machine for all new arrestees that's very similar to the body scanning machine that you see at the airport. And
what about outside vendors?
What about the outside vendors that bring food and other goods into the jails? Is there ever any problem there?
we haven't had a lot of problems in that regard. On occasion it is. We've had things as, I'll give you an example. Deputies, when they do searches in the housing units and in the barracks, will wear latex gloves to protect themselves. And so when they're done with those searches, they'll throw those latex gloves in the trash. Every once in a while, you'll see a latex glove laying on the floor next to a trash can or something. Well, the inmates figured out that these are the latex gloves that deputies use. So they actually had people on the outside hide some drugs in a latex glove and shoot it with a slingshot over the walls of our jail. And so when deputies see it, it just looks like trash. What we found through an informant was a significant amount of narcotics coming into our jail. Now, mind you, when there is a market for this in our jail facilities, there are more creative ways. You will see them come in through the courts. Somebody will show up at court with narcotics. The judge will then say they're to be taken into custody, and they try to smuggle them in. And so we are constantly catching it, but the efforts never stop. And so we have to remain vigilant on all fronts.
And I had one more question, and that is, what's the possibility
Of getting federal funding for health care?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. You've heard a lot about Obamacare, and here in Orange County and a lot of places it's not a very popular word, but I can tell you that there are opportunities within Obamacare to actually fund some of our treatment. And so in the Orange County Jail, in some counties, the sheriff actually runs the medical services for the jail. Here in Orange County, we have a memorandum of understanding with the healthcare agency, and so the Orange County Healthcare Agency actually runs all of our medical services in the jail, and so they are now working with social services, and what we are looking to do is enroll newly booked inmates into the system. And there are things that we have to pay for. If we have an inmate who is being treated inside of the county jail, that is funded through the healthcare agency's budget. However, if you have extensive medical needs and that requires you to now go out to a hospital, those sorts of things are covered under Obamacare, and there are some things for treatment after custody that we may be able to take advantage of as well. And so, ultimately it's tax dollars, whether it comes through the federal government or through the state or even through the county. And so a lot of people are opposed to those sorts of things. And so it's very difficult for us to navigate through, but it is our intent to take advantage of some of those resources, because if we don't pay for it through those resources, it will be paid for out of the county's general fund.
Let's move on to the second section, and there'll be plenty of time for questions as we go along. And I am asking you to use the mic because this is being recorded. We're actually videoing it, so it won't go on the tape. So wait until you get the mic in front of you, okay? Thanks. And if you have a question that you don't want to orally ask, please hand it to me, and I will hand it to Sheriff King. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the next phase, as I mentioned, this new population that we have, the law that kicked this whole thing off is Assembly Bill 109, and you will hear our population of inmates that are felons in our custody now referred to as AB 109 inmates. And there are actually 4 types of AB 109 inmates that we have in our custody. As I mentioned, with the new laws, the nonviolent, non-sexual, non-serious offenders are the population that used to go to state prison. They're now kept in the county jail. The second group of that population are people who are out on supervision, community supervision through the Orange County Probation Department now. Those are felons who used to be under the system of parole, but now they've been given to the Orange County Probation Department. And so if they are out in the community and they violate the terms of their supervision, they can be incarcerated for up to 6 months. And so we have that population that gets violated by the probation department and comes back in. Those are some of the folks who are attempting to smuggle drugs, and they know they're going to be picked up by their probation officers. They come in and report knowing they may have had what we refer to as a dirty drug test. And so they will attempt to smuggle in those drugs. We also have parole violators who are in our custody. Now, it used to be if you violated parole here in Orange County, the city of Anaheim's jail had a contract with the Department of Corrections, and so somebody that was violated on their terms of parole was booked into the Anaheim jail, and from there transported back to state prison to serve their parole violation. With the passage of AB 109, that stopped. We now also keep all parole violators. And so really the only people who are going back to state prison are either those who have a life sentence type of a crime or those that are going there under a new sentence. Almost all parole violators now stay in the county jail. And then the 4th type is what we call flash incarceration. The probation department and parole can take our inmate or their supervised releases, and without a court order or anything else, if they show up late for an appointment or they don't do the things that they have agreed to do while they're released, their probation or parole officer can incarcerate them for up to 10 days. And it is meant as a remedial measure to try to get folks back on track without necessarily putting them through the whole court process. And so we have what we refer to here in Orange County as SPOCs, State Prison Orange County, the new felons that are booked in and now kept in Orange County. You have those supervised by probation, those supervised by parole, and then the flash incarcerations. And so that's our population makeup. But what we don't want to do in Orange County is become what state prison became. And what we saw were triple bunking of inmates, not a whole lot in the way of programming. And in the county jails before AB 109, most inmates spent less than 30 days in the county jail. And so when you talk about that population, trying to create a program to prevent them from recidivating, I can't fix in 30 days what took 30 years to break. And so a lot of our programming was designed towards wood shop and things that kept people from being idle. And there was a segment that was also for those that did have longer sentences, an opportunity to do things like get a GED or enter into drug treatment programs or different behavioral therapy things. And Jeff, would you mind standing up? Jeff ran the Phoenix House, and among other things. And we have a lot of volunteers who volunteer their time through our inmate programs division and now through the Orange County Reentry Partnership to provide services, volunteering those opportunities. And Jeff has been deeply passionate about those things. He's been involved in those programs for years now. And so I don't know if you want to mention a little bit about what the Orange County Reentry Partnership is.
Good morning. Yeah, my name is Jeff. We've been meeting in the private community as a group of nonprofit and volunteer organizations in the county. We've been in partnership with the Sheriff's Department, probation, the courts, the healthcare agency, and created, through the leadership of the Sheriff's Department, created a group called the Orange County Reentry Partnership, or OCRP. It's our cool acronym. But OCRP's been around for almost 10 years or so now. I've been the chairperson for it for the past 8 years. And what we've been doing is working together on developing some of the grants, trying to find some of the monies that Steve's been talking about from the government and so forth. One of the really cool things I will mention is that we had, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, we received a grant from the federal government, the National Institute on Corrections, which is kind of like the federal standards